Welcome to the Why Did I Get Cancer podcast. I'm Deborah Herlax-Enos, a small-town girl turned TV nutritionist and healthy living expert. I design health programs for the average guy or gal, including those average guys named Metallica. On September 1st, 2020, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I asked every oncologist the same question, why did I get cancer? But none of my doctors had good answers for me. I wanted answers, and that's why I started this podcast. I want to help you to lower your cancer risk and provide self-care tips for those in the battle. I'm getting answers, and I want to share them with you. Welcome to part 2 of my 2-part episode with Dr. Sarah Trask. She is a homeopathic physician, and I tell you, I had a lot of takeaways, and I'm also being treated by her, and I'm actually feeling a lot better. And that is a story for a different time. But one of my big takeaways from today's episode was how she looks at the whole body for healing. So it's not just, what are you eating? What are you doing for exercise? How are you sleeping? But it's also the emotional component, the spiritual component. And she said, in our culture, we really have been taught for years to just, something bad happens, you just kind of stuff it, you suppress those emotions, and it has to come out somewhere. And it usually will come out as a physical manifestation. So is that cancer? Is that high blood pressure? Is that anxiety? Nobody really knows, but it's going to have to come out at some point. So I think that was one of my big takeaways with her today is I don't need to be yelling and screaming if something goes wrong, but I do need to process some of those emotions. It could be journaling. It could be going for a walk and kind of just having a fake conversation with the person I'm mad at, and then maybe telling them, hey, like this happened and I'm not very happy about this. So just being really clear with your yes and your no. So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And if you didn't hear last week, go back and give it a listen. So my over nurturing, people pleasing, like they say in AA, your best thinking got you here. So my more typical, would be to people please. And I walk into a room and I take everybody's temperature. Everybody good? Everybody good? What do you need? What do you know? I don't do that anymore post cancer, but that is my default. And I'm constantly running surveillance now.
Interesting.
As I'm getting used to not over nurturing or people pleasing. And it's been a process. But I think what I'm realizing after our conversation today is I still got work to do, Sarah.
Well, I think that you're
Yeah.
taking the action, and that's associated with your will. You have the will to get better, and you know what the action is that you need to do. But I think the missing ingredient is allowing those emotions to come up. To come up. As you let it go, it makes space for God's truth.
Oh, that's so good. That is so good. Okay, that's a lot to process, and I will continue to process that. But I can imagine in your practice with various types of maladies that you see, from lung cancer to bladder cancer to you name it, there is an emotional component to each illness.
Yeah. And what I've seen is there's often, you can tell what emotion is being suppressed based on where it's manifesting in the body.
Really?
Yeah. So left side, again, being that projection towards women and the over nurturing. Right side is always male, the male side. So whether it's father or husband or son, but the men in your life. Lung cancer is deep grief that is being suppressed. I mean, my 94-year-old grandmother passed away of lung cancer and didn't smoke a day in her life. Was never exposed to anything that would have, asbestos or anything that would have caused that in a toxic form. But I know she had a lot of deep grief, and she was a woman of God. She taught Bible study, but I believe what happened is that she mentally forgave because she knew that was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I forgive this person for what they did to me. It was horrific what they did to her. And I believe that that grief was held so deeply, and she never expressed it. I can remember saying to her, let me say something. I'm so mad.
Mm.
And she would always be like, no, forgive them. That's how God would do it. Forgive them.
Wow.
And, but she never cried about it.
Hmm.
She never sobbed or expressed her deep sadness about it. And I believe that was the cause of her lung cancer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, if you think about smokers, they smoke to suppress the grief because they don't want to feel the deep grief. So each time you have a cigarette, it suppresses the grief. It suppresses the grief. You don't
Really?
have to feel it. You don't have to feel it. Instead, you feel that charge from the nicotine and from the inhalation. It's like, I don't want to feel. It stops that outpouring of grief.
Wow.
And
Okay.
there's lots of different modalities that like I said, Louise Hay, traditional Chinese medicine.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain indications in certain areas of the body that we see this. And I mean, there was a British thoracic surgeon in the 1960s who he noticed or characterized his patients with lung cancer as having emotionally stifled feelings. He didn't specifically say grief, but that was the 1960s. It was very, very amazing discovery. And he went on to do studies, and he discovered that people with lung cancer, quote, have poor and restrictive outlets for their emotions. So versus the patients he had in his thoracic practice with non-malignant lung issues, right?
Wow. Wow.
So, and I mean, if we think about, I always try to take a step back and look at things from a broad perspective. And when I think about autoimmune disease or the body attacking itself,
Mm-hmm.
there's some stuff going on. It's not,
Right.
it's aggressive. It's
Yeah.
and sometimes can feel like it's coming from somewhere externally. And that's
Yes.
again what has led me to looking at spirituality and how that can affect our health. And really, I've always been somebody who could feel.
Mm-hmm.
In homeopathy, we would call it the syphilitic miasm or syphilis, but it's somebody who has a very thin veil between themselves and the spirit world. um, I would say even my son had a little friend growing up, or an imaginary friend,
Mm-hmm.
but I can feel things. I'm quite sensitive to how things feel, or that I might not be alone right now, or this patient is carrying somewhat of a dark entity with them. Um, and so I've been really experimenting with that since COVID, because COVID, of course, shut us all down,
Yeah.
and many of us chose to just go inward and feel through a lot of stuff. And I do feel like the more stuff that I feel through emotionally and let go of, the more of God's truth is flowing in.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. And in that truth, there's healing.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
then your truth, I'll say it, I'll customize it to myself. My truth, when I'm walking in truth, it actually becomes contagious to other people.
Hmm.
And that's what I really love
Hmm.
about being a woman of faith, is that we're all going through stuff at all times. But he truly is my anchor. I don't know how I couldn't do life alone
Yeah,
without him. But I have such a heart for people who are.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because oftentimes, if and I think I had a big fear about doing this podcast today, because when you start talking about um, how the emotions or suppressing certain emotions can cause cancer,
Hmm.
it actually makes the person feel, who's listening, who had cancer, it can make them feel like it's my fault. I did this to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not about getting into shame or self blame or judgment of self, because again, that's not what God wants for us. So it's a very easy, and I've been there myself many times. It's very easy to go into this place of self-judgment. But when you have God and a desire for a relationship with God, it helps you get out of that judgment and really have compassion for yourself. And have
Yes.
compassion
Yes.
for yourself as a child, or your grandmother, or it just helps you be more loving in general.
It does. And that compassion towards self. And I'm quoted often by my girlfriends. They'll say, I hear your voice in the middle of the night saying, be gentle with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're not gentle with
No.
ourselves in most cases. We're driven by fear and condemnation, and we're addicted to busyness. I'm talking about myself. We're addicted
Mm-hmm.
to busyness, thinking that we haven't done enough, feeling guilty for, saying, I can't help you with that, or, like I'm focused on this right now. And none of those emotions, as you've so clearly told us today, none of those emotions are doing anything
No.
for your health. And maybe you're leading your family, you're making meals, you're taking kids in carpool.
Yeah.
That can also become contagious to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a learning process for my whole family. I'm trying to teach my kids just feel. But I can remember that when they were little, I would say to them, it's okay. It's okay. I was terrified of their tears. Here, have some more milk, or let me nurse you if you're crying, or
Mm-hmm.
we're trained to suppress
We
our
are.
emotions instead of just allow. And I mean, if I could go back and do it differently, I would do it so differently. Luckily, they're 9 and 11. I still have a little bit of time, I
You
hope.
too. Yeah.
Um, but just also, I feel like having an understanding of how the spirit world can come into play is also really important. And it was actually I think it was last week. It was right before we talked on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I think I decided to do the podcast, but of course it got me mulling through some things in terms of what I wanted to talk about with you with regards to cancer. But I was sitting with a patient, and the patient was engaging in self-harm and had some suicidal ideations. And I could actually feel an entity with this patient who had committed suicide himself. And I immediately just picked up, this is a very, very smart individual and very, very analytical sitting in front of me. And I don't consider myself somebody highly intelligent. But it didn't even cross my mind. I just said, okay, I want you to not think about this. I want you to just feel if this is true. And I drew him a picture and I said, this is God. This is you. How do we connect to God? We connect to God through our emotions. It's the only way we connect to God.
Wow.
We feel God.
We do.
We receive God's love. We receive God's truth. We have a desire for God. It's all in the heart. It's all a feeling.
That's right.
So what do? Nowadays, we've taken God out of the picture because we've cut off this.
Yeah.
There's no more, I mean, not just culturally, we've, taken God out of schools, it isn't a huge conversation. And if anything, so much of our world is designed, and this could be biblical. I mean, I'm just saying, but there's so much happening in this world that is dark.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that there is a lot of dark entities, whatever you might want to call it,
Dark forces.
Dark forces influencing people on earth.
Yeah.
And when we cut off our emotions, so let's say we aren't connected to God because we're suppressing our emotions, these little wounds form in our body because we're not allowing those to heal. Then they fester. Then they create almost like an open place for influence of a spirit who has a similar wound to hook in. And I've always believed in the spirit world because,
me too.
Yeah, I mean, we just do. If you know God, you know that there is a spirit world, and we know there are people who have died that weren't very nice and weren't very happy, and they're here on earth and they're stuck here and they're trying to
Wreak
influence.
havoc.
Yeah, they're wreaking havoc.
Yeah.
And so I would say that spirits can also, I think about self-harm, and I think about cancer, and I think about my daughter's autoimmune disease, and I can feel there is an external force. There is an external energy, spirit, or whatever you want to believe. This is what I believe, acting on that body.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
causing physical illness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to address that,
You just feel your emotions.
right. Right.
Because there's no hook, there's no wound for them to get in if you've healed that.
So basically, Sarah, it all goes back to suppression,
Yeah. Yeah.
suppress, if you're putting your emotions in a box,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
going to come out at some point.
Yeah.
It just might come out as a cancer
Yeah.
or as a divorce
Mm-hmm.
or having a breakdown in front of a barista
Yeah.
at Starbucks.
Yeah.
It can't stay in there forever in a box with a nice little ribbon on it.
No. No. And if we
Okay.
want real healing to occur, we have to look at the whole picture. We can't just look at the physicals. We can't just look at what we're putting in our bodies. We can't just look at radiation poisoning. We can't just look at DDT. We can't just look at chlorine, fluoride. Mm-hmm. We have to look at the emotional and spiritual factors that can come into play. The more we heal our emotions, the more we heal ourselves, the better we know ourselves, and the more we know what is influencing us, and being able to have discernment.
That's right.
And know truth when it happens or when we hear it.
Right. And we talked earlier, I think before we started recording, that the truth can be messy.
Yeah.
So we might just have to walk in a mess for a while, but to realize that on the other side of that mess is freedom. Okay, hey, dry January peeps. Let's move into February. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about alcohol. There's been a lot of research lately about alcohol and cancer, and there are health experts now saying that alcohol is the new smoking. So I think we just need to be prepared, because I still like to have a festive drink while my friends might be having a glass of wine. So enter in Martinelli apple cider, and they started making non-alcohol, unfermented drinks back in 1917, right before Prohibition. So they were preparing for Prohibition. And they have some recipes on their website. One of my favorite is the Martinelli apple cider ginger mule. I'm going to post the recipe in the show notes. It is so great. It's got real apples in it, apple cider, ginger beer. I usually do the zero sugar ginger beer. There's lots of those available to knock the calorie count down even more. So that way I can have two. So again, I'm a huge fan of Martinelli apple cider. They've got lots of different flavors, including pear and mango, and they've also got some organic products too. So I hope this helps you move from dry January into a dry February, or as some of my friends call it, a damp February. So maybe you're cutting back on alcohol by 50%, which is, again, a huge bonus. So I think it's a lot easier to cut back on alcohol when we have alternatives. So that's why, again, I'm a huge fan of Martinelli apple cider, and I hope you enjoy.
One of my friends who's a naturopath, she was telling me, you should do some videos on what it looks like to release emotions. Because the way I can describe it to you is, it's like a child. It's the way a child would have an emotion. And when my daughter was sick, I did an anger release every single day. And I would go out to the woods and I would pick up sticks and smash them and scream. And it looks like a tantrum. But within about 5-10 minutes, that anger's lifted. And guess what's underneath? The grief or the fear. Right. And so I do refer so many people to this counselor that I work with that does emotional processing, but there's a really great book called Emotional Fitness. I find it a tad on the parent blamey side.
Okay.
but there's some really good tools in there for processing emotions.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm one of these days I might make some videos of what it looks like to actually process not just anger, but grief would look like sobbing until it's
Right.
done, and it is
Right.
messy, and
It is messy.
it's ugly, but it's important. It's so important.
And we all might be different in how we process it, right? I mean,
Mhm.
for some, could it be they have this emotion and they're processing it and they go for a 5 mile hike? I don't know. Can you also like kind of process it in
I
other ways like that?
I feel like personally, if you go for a 5 mile hike, what are you doing on that hike to process the emotion?
Yeah.
Or are you just walking? I think that for fear is good to get moving.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't really love the idea of a rage room, because I feel like you're taking it out on something else, like you're breaking something. But I
Okay.
mean, I would love if you would get this counselor on your podcast sometime,
I think, well, you connect us. Sounds amazing.
because again, she brings this emotional processing into her practice. We have very similar outlooks on disease,
Mm-hmm.
and we bring God into our practice every day. So it's yeah, I mean, it's not my forte. Again, I clean my house to avoid my emotions, or I eat, or
Mm-hmm.
something, or I put on a show. I still do it every day, but I'm gonna be darned if I don't keep trying, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Because we're not perfect and
No.
we're all in process. And so the way I look at it is I just try to be a smidge, more aware every
Hmm.
day
Hmm.
and better every day. And I don't
Hmm.
always hit it, but
Hmm.
forward
Well, there's
motion is progress.
forward motion is progress,
It
and
is.
having a desire for God and God's truth is, it can keep you there, and it can keep that faith alive, that if you do this
Yes.
work, it can
Yes.
move things. And I think, I needed to build that, not my faith in God, but the faith that this would work, by
Mhm.
seeing how it changed my kids. So
Yeah.
when my daughter was 3, she was screaming every day when I would pick her up at preschool. It was intense.
Yeah.
And then I would have to like carry her to the car while she was kicking me. And I was worried. To be really honest, I was worried about her at the time. And
Yeah.
then she would cry the whole way home, and kick the back of my seat the whole way home.
Oh.
And I remember coming out of my office one day and saying to this counselor that I work with, Lisa Mackey, I have to go pick up my daughter. I said her name. And then she said, what's happening? And I said, she's just so intense and angry, and I don't know what's wrong with her. And I told her what was happening. And it had been happening for like months and months on end,
Mm.
every day, like no fail, every day. And a lot of people would say, that's just because they finally feel safe with you and they can express everything they were holding in all day. And
Mhm.
that's all well and good, but it never felt like truth to me. She
Okay.
was the best preschool. Like, it was such a loving place. Oh my gosh, I wish I could go there. Um, but,
Me too.
but what Lisa said to me, she said, "What are you angry at?" And I was like, "I'm not angry." She goes, "Well, are you irritable? Are you agitated?" And I said, "Yeah, especially when I pick her up and she's doing
Yeah.
that." And she's like, "Maybe you should just do an anger release." And because she's just expressing to you what you're holding in. And I was like, "Whoa, that's the
Really?
truth." So I got in the car that day, and I asked her how to do it. And I started a little bit of swearing and a little bit of rolled up my windows, because I know everybody in my town. And I was like, ah, ah, ah. But no word of a lie. By the time I got to that preschool, I went into the gate. My daughter comes running up to me, takes me by the hand, gives me a big hug, takes me by the hand, and tours me around her preschool. "Mommy, look at the sandbox, and look at this slide." And she never did it again after that day. That was it.
Wow.
And I was like, no, no, no. Like, I remember calling her and being like, "How does this work? Teach
Wow,
me how to
what a
do this."
shift. So your
Yeah.
daughter was never kicking the seat on the way home after that?
Never.
Oh my
Never.
gosh. I think we just have no idea the
No
power of
idea.
our emotions. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, Sarah. Okay. So I could spend thousands of dollars a year on just the right food and all the gym memberships and the hot yoga and all those things. But if I am not working on this and
Yeah.
I'm circling my face and my heart and my head,
Yeah.
then I'm I'm working out of a deficit every day.
I know, and it's so hard,
Wow.
but just think about how God created the world too. He didn't create it to be hard for us. We created it to be hard for
We
us.
did that. We did
Like,
that. Yeah.
it should be so easy. God created us to feel
To
and
be
to connect to
easy
Him
and to
and
keep it simple.
to keep it simple. But
Mhm.
we're on this like hamster wheel of making it difficult for ourselves, and it's been like that since the beginning of time,
It
right?
has, because difficult makes us relevant,
Yeah,
makes us important.
yeah.
If we can just be busy, 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 and I got to run here and I got to run there, and
People value this busyness. Like, what
they
is that?
do, they do. I'd like to think there was a time I think we were getting away from that, but I
Yeah,
think COVID kind of shut that
slowed us
down.
down. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
certainly did for a lot of people.
it did.
But
It did.
also, would God create a world where, you have to eat organic, not to get an autoimmune disease or not to get cancer?
Right,
No.
right. Who can afford to eat like that
Well, I mean,
in today's economy? It's
and
just,
wasn't Jesus going around healing the lepers and hanging out with the taxpayers and the poor?
yep,
So,
that's right.
it doesn't make sense, and it
It
needs
doesn't
to
make
make
sense.
sense. And
Yeah.
so I feel like I love these conversations because I learn so much too. And like I said, I feel like I'm at the infancy of understanding all of
Mm.
this, but it's exciting because it feels like truth. It feels like this is this is something. This is really
Yeah.
something. And
Yeah.
I can see the changes. And I'll say to my patients over the last 16 years, and they find it so funny. I'll say, did you have a lot of insecurity growing up? Like there was not a lot of safety? And they'll be like, how did you know that? And I'll say, it's showing up. It's showing up in the remedy that's coming up for you. And
Wow.
so, and it happens time and again. And over the years, I'm just like, there is so much to this. There's so much more we need to know. And homeopathy is a lifelong study. And you couldn't, in a
Mm.
lifetime, exhaust the amount you could study. But studying God and how, the universe He created works, I mean, that's my new passion. That is my new passion. But in
Oh,
being able to incorporate that with homeopathy has been the greatest gift.
it is the most amazing gift. Your patients must be just, they're so blessed to work with you. But I
Thank
also know
you.
you're blessed to work with them. That's,
Agreed.
yeah,
Agreed. They're my
that's,
gift.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I want to talk about your homeopathic first aid kit, but
Right.
also how do people work with you? Because I want to be neighbors with you and go out to lunch. And I know that's not possible, at least not today,
Not
but
today, but
I want
if
to
it,
work with you. So how do people work with you? How do they find you?
they can just email me. I have a very
Okay.
simple website. You can't even make an appointment on it because I'm very, very bad at technology. I'm very
Okay.
averse to it. I tried
Oh,
so many apps to do all my scheduling, but
yeah.
I like that person to person. So they can call me at
Yeah.
902-542-2317. Most of the time I answer the phone, or they can leave me
Okay.
a message and I will book their appointments. Or they can go on my website and my email address is there and they can email me at my business email.
Great. And I'll
Um,
put all of this in the show notes.
yeah,
Yeah.
that would be great. If they want to work with Lisa Mackey on emotional processing, they can contact her or contact me and I can get her information
Great.
to
Thank
them.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, the homeopathic first aid kit is just this awesome toolbox to have at home to
Mhm.
start the process of using homeopathy at home. And it's really empowering because you don't always have to go to the Tylenol. You can go to the arnica, or you can go to the belladonna, or if you have a puncture wound, you might still want to get a tetanus shot, but you have Ledum to take because
Hmm.
time is of the essence. Or Ruta if you have a sprained ankle, or Rustux if you
Oh my
twist your
gosh,
back.
look at that.
So there's 30 remedies in here.
Wow. Okay.
And
That's a really great looking
isn't
box.
that a
Yeah.
beautiful little box? Yeah, I love it. I'm very proud of it. I spent a long time putting it together and
I'll
really
bet.
thinking through, what people would need at home, and talking to a lot of my patients about what they would need at home. But there's a booklet that comes with it.
Okay.
And it just starts with like some general storing the remedies, dispensing the remedies, because a lot of people haven't used them before. They look like this, and they're all
Hmm.
grafted onto sugar pellets. And
Okay.
then to dispense, you don't touch them with your fingers, and you would
Mm.
just do this and then under the tongue,
Okay.
because again, it's very, very dilute substances. So you don't want it to interfere with any oils on your hands or
Oh,
anything.
that's fascinating because I've used homeopathic,
Oh, you have?
they're
Yeah.
like little tiny pills,
Pillules. Yeah.
but I would put them in my hand and then put them in my
Right.
mouth. So it sounds
No,
like
you
I
don't.
was okay.
But
Look what I'm learning today, Sarah.
if you didn't have any success with them, so a lot of people say, "Oh, they didn't work. Homeopathy doesn't work.
Right.
It's just infinitesimal doses of sugar."
Okay.
But if you do it properly and it's the right match, which
Mm.
in here, I'll go through, for instance, nausea, vomiting, and I go
So you
through.
have a little written out guide for how
Yeah,
to use it.
and it's all alphabetized, and then so you would go to headache if you had a headache, and you would say with confusion after injury, arnica, and then congestive with restlessness, arsenicum. If you have both of those symptoms, then you would go to the materia medica at the back and read about those under their portions that talk about headaches and see which one fits better. It's fun. It's great
It's
fun.
fun.
Yeah. And there's a free
Okay.
course that comes with it that I'm also really proud of. I had so much fun doing it, where we talk about homeopathic philosophy and dispensing and how to use the actual kit. And we go through all of the remedies. So
And so that's a video
that's,
course.
yes. And it's free with the purchase of the first aid kit.
Okay. All this will be tagged in the show notes. And can you just
Great.
hold one for me? I'm buying it today.
Absolutely.
So you ship all over, I'm assuming. You can
Oh,
ship it
yes.
anywhere.
Well, I
Okay.
haven't shipped internationally yet, but I ship
Okay.
to all of North America.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Um, Sarah, this was just such a blessing to me
I feel the
today.
same, Deborah.
Oh
I
my
really do.
gosh. And I'll just let everybody know we were both a little nervous at the beginning. So we took a couple of minutes to just pray and
Mhm.
cover our conversation. And it was really beautiful. And I really felt our prayers.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
And my husband prayed for us too. I mean, it's been a really cool morning. I just got to say. So Sarah, thank you for blessing us with your information. I really feel like I was over treated for breast cancer, and that's maybe you and I can hop on another call and do a recording about that. But I wish I would have known you
You know what? It's never too
years ago.
late.
It's
Deborah,
never too late.
I would love to offer you, and I was going to say this morning when I asked you about your own experience, before we get on the call, I would love to take your case sometime. No charge, just let's sit down and take your
I'd,
case and have a
I'd
chat.
love that.
And yeah, I would
I'd
love that
love
too.
that. Thank you. I
Thank you.
that's a beautiful gift and I
Yeah.
receive it. So thank you.
Yay.
Yeah. I
God
really feel
bless.
like I overdid it. I regret a lot of what I did during cancer. I regret many of the treatments, but I'm here today
Yes.
and I'm talking about it,
Yeah.
and you don't know what you don't know. And as we talked earlier, when you hear the C word,
Hmm.
it's really easy to go into a fear spiral,
Yeah.
which I think all spirals are fear,
Yeah.
but I really went into an ugly place for a few weeks. And making decisions from an ugly place are usually not God driven decisions.
Absolutely. I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been there.
So,
Yeah.
oh,
I
Sarah,
hear
thank
you.
you. Yeah.
So
I wish we were neighbors. I think that we would,
listen, if you ever want to come visit in Canada,
I do.
you
I
want to come.
do.
You must
Yeah.
have snow in Seattle.
We do. We
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
it's going to snow here this week.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's getting cold here. I'm looking at the all the leaves are turning, and yeah, you're probably
Yeah.
beyond turning at this point if you've got
No,
snow
there's
coming.
still some. Well, no,
There's
no, there's no more orange.
Oh God.
I also live on a lake, and I haven't
Okay.
looked out the window today, but nope, the leaves are gone.
The leaves are gone. We still have a lot of leaves, so you're a little bit ahead of us. So,
Yeah.
Sarah, thanks for joining me on Why
Oh,
Did I Get
thank you,
Cancer?
Deborah.
I have to tell you, sleep has been a struggle for me since cancer and forced into menopause and giving up all my precious hormones. And then I interviewed a physician on my podcast, and he was talking about grounding sheets. And I thought, this sounds a little bit, I'll just say it, a little bit wackadoo to me. But I was so desperate to be a better sleeper that I thought, what do I have to lose? I dove into the research, and there are really good studies that show sleeping on grounding sheets will actually reduce your cortisol levels. When your cortisol levels are lower, you have lower levels of inflammation. You're more likely to be in a parasympathetic, which is a good state. And if all those things are happening, you're going to be sleeping deeper. So again, I did my research and I found the best brand I could on the market. They're organic. They're 80% organic. They're soft. And you know what? I can't tell I'm sleeping on a grounding sheet. I have heard that some grounding sheets can be very rough, and these are soft, and they just continue to get softer with every wash. So the brand I love is called Ground Lux. So go to the link in my show notes. You're going to see the link to Ground Lux, and then you need to use the code ENOS20 to get 20% off of your entire purchase, which is actually pretty incredible. They were running sales like that during Black Friday, but certainly not in January and February. So I'm feeling super grateful that they have given me this code through the end of February. So use the code ENOS20 to get 20% off of your grounding sheets at Ground Lux. Enjoy. Hey, y'all, can you do me a favor today and go and leave a review of this podcast? I know that the more great reviews, wink, wink, emphasis on great, reviews that I get, along with more downloads and more subscribers, that pushes this podcast out to people who might normally not even find it. And the reason I started this podcast and my real heart for starting this podcast is that I needed this information. It wasn't available. And so I started a podcast so that I could be a blessing to others. So you're a blessing to me just by being here. And again, thank you for your support. Thank you for your positive reviews and all of the notes that you send me. And also just wanted to say, hey, keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. And if you need medical advice, please reach out to your team. That is going to be just the best source for you because they know you. So again, I hope you enjoy this podcast.